LiSTNR production.
Friday, January 20, 2017. A humid, rainy day in Melbourne's CBD. Bustling Bourke Street became the scene of unspeakable horror. 6 people were killed, 27 others suffered horrific injuries when a man, high on drugs, deliberately drove his car through a crowd of shoppers. It was one of the worst examples of mass murder in Australian history. A miracle that more people weren't killed. I'm Dan Mullins. This is Crime Insider's Judgment, a deep dive on a judge's final verdict of a crime and what transpired to incite that judgment. Demetrius, or James Gargasoulas, appeared for sentencing in the Victorian Supreme Court in front of Justice Mark Weinberg in February 2019. It was just over 2 years since Gargasoulas had driven his car through crowds of pedestrians on Bourke Street in Melbourne's central business district. Justice Weinberg's judgment, read on February 22, 2019, provides detailed analysis and insight into the trial that found Gargasoulas guilty. I'll read directly from that judgment. After a trial lasting some 5 days, a jury found you guilty on the 13th of November 2018 of those 6 murders and of 27 charges of reckless conduct endangering life. It is now my responsibility to sentence you for these offences. The maximum sentence for murder is life imprisonment, and for reckless conduct endangering life, 10 years imprisonment. At about 1:30 p.m. on the day of your offending, you drove a stolen, maroon-coloured Holden Commodore into the centre of Melbourne. When you reached Bourke Street, you turned left into the Bourke Street Mall. The Bourke Street Mall, as its name suggests, is a pedestrian and tram-only section of the central business district. On a normal Friday afternoon, it is crowded with people shopping, tourists, and those going about their everyday business. You deliberately swerved from the tram lines in the Bourke Street Mall onto the southern footpath, which was, of course, crowded. You accelerated, mowing down many of the pedestrians who were walking along that footpath. You were obviously well aware of their presence. You were also well aware of the likelihood that by driving through the crowds in the way that you did, you would kill or at least seriously injure those that you struck. You continued driving along the footpath all the way along the Bourke Street Mall from just opposite the Myer department store and then past Elizabeth, Queen and William Streets. Eventually, your car came to a stop in Bourke Street between William and King Streets. You left a trail of destruction behind you. After all this carnage, you travelled a further 100 metres or so west along the footpath in Bourke Street. Your car came to a halt as a result of a combination of mechanical failure and of it having been rammed by police. You were tasered and shot in the right upper arm before being arrested. A urine sample taken from you that evening yielded positive results for amphetamine-type substances as well as barbiturates and benzodiazepines. Several days later, on the 23rd of January 2017, after being assessed as fit to be interviewed, you made a no-comment record of interview. As the charges of which you were convicted make clear, you, by your deliberate and wanton conduct, murdered 6 young people, none of whom you knew, and none of whom had done you any wrong. In addition, a number of the injuries that you inflicted upon those who happened to survive your murderous attack were so serious as to be life-threatening. Those injuries will likely continue to impact on those victims for the rest of their lives. The horror of what you did has profoundly affected the lives of many of those who were present that day in Bourke Street and who either witnessed your actions or their aftermath. The law provides that among the main purposes for which you are to be sentenced is to punish you to an extent and in a manner that is just in all of the circumstances. I'm also required to have regard to the need to deter you and others from committing offences of the same or a similar character. I must manifest this court's denunciation of what you did and ensure that the community is adequately protected from you. In meeting these obligations, I must have regard to what are described as current sentencing practices, giving that factor appropriate but not excessive weight. The extraordinary nature of your offending means that there are few, if any, precedents to draw upon. Plainly, I must take into account the nature and gravity of your offending, including your moral culpability for what you did. I must also bear in mind the impact of your offences upon the many victims of your actions. I am required to have regard to your previous character and to the presence of any aggravating and mitigating factors. Before we get to the sentencing and the background to what happened on the day of the massacre, it's important to remember the victims. The rampage resulted in a horrific toll. 6 people were killed and 27 people suffered serious injuries. A total of 37 people were hospitalized. The injuries varied greatly in severity, reflecting the nature of being struck by a car travelling at speed. There were 6 fatalities, and the 6 individuals who tragically lost their lives were 10-year-old Thalia Haken, a bright young girl who was with her family on her way to a concert. She died almost instantly. 3-month-old Zachary Matthew Bryant was in a pram with his twin sister being pushed by their mother when the pram was struck. He was rushed to hospital but died the following day. His twin sister and mother were also injured. 25-year-old Yosuke Keno was a Japanese student studying in Australia. He was hit and killed near the Block Arcade. 22-year-old Jess Moody was from Sydney. She was walking with colleagues when she was fatally struck. 33-year-old Matthew Sai was hit near the intersection with McKillop Street and died in hospital that afternoon. 33-year-old Bhavita Patel was hit near the intersection of Elizabeth Street and died in hospital 10 days later due to her injuries. 27 victims suffered serious injuries, including multiple bone fractures, concussions, traumatic brain injuries, organ damage, internal bleeding, deep cuts and severe grazes from the impact and being dragged or thrown, soft tissue damage and muscle, ligament, and tendon damage. Many of these injuries required extensive medical treatment, surgeries, and long periods of rehabilitation. Beyond the immediate physical trauma, a significant number of victims, both those physically injured and witnesses, suffered profound psychological injuries, including post-traumatic stress disorder, flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, and avoidance of reminders of the event. They suffered from anxiety and depression, lasting psychological distress. They suffered with grief and loss for those who lost loved ones or witnessed the tragedy. The impact of Gargasoulas' actions extended far beyond the immediate physical harm, leaving a lasting legacy of trauma and suffering for hundreds of individuals and the broader community. The events of the Bourke Street Mall rampage on the 20th of January 2017 were the culmination of several months of escalating erratic behaviour by James Gargasoulas, primarily fueled by a severe drug-induced psychosis. It was agreed at trial that throughout December 2016 and January 2017, Gargasoulas suffered from this condition characterised by a distorted perception of reality, including seeing or hearing things others couldn't, and holding unusual, often deluded beliefs that influenced his actions. While similar to paranoid schizophrenia, the law does not consider drug-induced psychosis a mental illness for a criminal defence. Gargasoulas' background included periods in Coober Pedy and Melbourne. Critically, throughout 2016, despite claims of minimal personal use, he was extensively trafficking methamphetamine, or ice. Upon his return to Melbourne in October 2016, his ice use escalated significantly, coinciding with the onset of increasingly bizarre and alarming delusional and paranoid thoughts. He began reporting what he called spiritual experiences, claiming to possess the God gene, seeing the triangle of the Illuminati, and needing to contact Aboriginal royalty. His paranoia became extreme, accusing his brother Angelo of using his car to dispose of drug dealer bodies and conspiring to murder him. He also falsely claimed Angelo had killed an ex-girlfriend and frequently spoke of killing people himself. Friends and family, including Angelo, described him as erratic, unpredictable, high all the time, cooked or fried, attributing his behaviour to heavy ice use and noting his denial of drug problems. A former girlfriend reported his regular ice use of a crack pipe, and his accusations of her and Angelo trying to set him up. His violent tendencies also emerged. On October 31st, 2016, in a deluded belief his pregnant partner was cheating, he assaulted her by repeatedly punching her while she was 5 months pregnant with his child. The judge highlighted a chilling incident in January 2017, just 3 days before the Bourke Street rampage, when Gargasoulas warned a friend that if chased by police or anyone tried to stop him, he would, quote, keep driving and start running people over. The prosecution viewed this as a significant evidence of premeditation. In the days leading up to the tragedy, his instability intensified. On January 14, he sent bizarre religious text messages to his mother and was arrested for threatening a neighbour with a knife. He was also wanted on 2 outstanding warrants for dangerous driving in November 2016, where he admitted to police knowing his actions, that is, driving into oncoming traffic to evade police, were likely to kill or seriously injure others. Alarmingly, despite police opposition and these admissions, he was released on bail on January the 14th, ironically, to appear in court on the very day of the Bourke Street attack, January 20. His erratic and delusional behaviour continued, including attending police stations to discuss religious ideas, behaving strangely at the county court, telephoning the Chief Justice with serious information relating to the government, and ranting about the Spirit of God and predicting the end of the world at St. Francis's Church on January 18. Later that evening, he assaulted his mother's partner and stole the maroon Commodore that became the weapon in the rampage. He made incoherent 000 calls about comets, bunkers and the Illuminati, and was seen driving through red lights at high speed and yelling from his car, demonstrating his escalating and dangerous state. Coming up, what happened that day in downtown Melbourne? By way of background, I'll read a summary of the judgment handed down by Justice Weinberg. The judge's remarks are characterised by a profound sense of the devastating impact on victims and a careful balancing of legal principles against the unique and severe circumstances of the case. The judge commenced by recounting Gargasoulas' actions in the early hours of January 20, 2017. After using ice at his mother's unit, he became delusional, proclaiming a belief that his brother Angelo and Ms. Akia Muo were plotting to kill him. This delusion rapidly escalated into real-world violence. At approximately 2:15 a.m., Gargasoulas launched an entirely unprovoked attack on his brother Angelo in the street, stabbing him repeatedly in the head and chest with a kitchen knife, causing life-threatening injuries. Immediately after this brutal assault, Gargasoulas fled, ignoring police instructions to pull over and speeding off along Punt Road. His delusional state and murderous intent continued to manifest. Around 10 to 3 in the morning at the Gatwick Hotel, he chillingly informed a friend, "Somebody is following me, and if I see them, I will mow them down," adding, "I am going to do something drastic. Take everyone out. They can suffer the consequences. Watch me. You'll see me tonight on the news. The police have stopped me before, but they ain't gonna get me this time. I'll make you believe me." The prosecution strongly relied on these statements as irrefutable evidence of his premeditation, demonstrating his clear awareness of the nature and quality of his impending actions in Bourke Street. Gargasoulas later returned to his mother's unit, where he violently forced Ms. Muir into the Commodore. For the next hour, he drove dangerously through Melbourne, speeding and running red lights. After a brief stop, he again forced Ms. Muir into the car. At around 11 a.m., police, who were actively searching for him, spotted the Commodore. Although Gargasoulas initially drove normally once he realised he was being trailed at 11:30 a.m. in South Melbourne, he briefly pulled over when instructed, but then accelerated rapidly and sped off. Police were forced to call off their pursuit. His reckless driving continued at high speed, narrowly missing pedestrians and running red lights. During this period, he again told Ms. Muir, "I swear, if the police catch up to me, I'm going to run everyone down in the city." This marked at least the third time he had voiced such a threat, further solidifying the argument for premeditation. When members of the critical incident response team approached his car on foot, firearms drawn, Gargasoulas forcefully pushed Ms. Muir out of the door and drove off onto the Westgate Freeway at high speed. Around 1:15 p.m, the police air wing located him in Yarraville, and several police vehicles began following him, instructed not to engage in a direct pursuit, but to maintain a safe distance. Gargasoulas ignored requests to stop and drove towards the city via the Westgate Bridge. He eventually reached the Central Business District, driving slowly at times, but also on the wrong side of the road and through red lights. Police lost visual contact with him by the time he reached Spencer Street. The judge described the terrifying moments at the intersection of Flinders and Swanston Streets, where Gargasoulas began performing donuts and burnouts with his upper body protruding from the driver's window, yelling and taunting onlookers and police. He then drove north on Swanston Street, pursued by a convoy of police cars, before suddenly veering left onto the footpath, narrowly missing pedestrians, and then turning left into the Bourke Street Mall. The judge stated that from this point, Gargasoulas drove at speeds of 57 to 61 kilometres an hour along Bourke Street, covering 4 crowded city blocks in just moments. The horrifying CCTV footage viewed by the jury unequivocally showed that he was in control of his vehicle throughout its passage along the footpath, skillfully manoeuvring between structures. The judge directly refuted Gargasoulas' claim of being largely oblivious to his actions, asserting, and here I'll quote directly from Justice Weinberg, "I reject that evidence. I am satisfied, as were the jury, that you knew full well what you were doing. In addition, the evidence makes it perfectly clear that you knew that, by your actions, you were likely to kill or seriously injure those who happened to be in your path." This finding underscored his high level of culpability. The judge then detailed Gargasoulas' personal circumstances. Born in Adelaide in 1990, he was 27 at the time of these offences. He was raised by his father in Coober Pedy after his parents separated when he was 2. He had limited contact with his father's subsequent children, but maintained regular contact with a half-sister from his mother's side. Psychiatrist Dr. Andrew Carroll's report indicated Gargasoulas described his father as strict and violent, claiming he would bash Gargasoulas and his brother daily. Gargasoulas was expelled from school at 14 after constructing a homemade bomb using mining explosives. Though he returned and completed Year 11, he struggled academically. He moved to Melbourne at 17, attempting Year 12, but dropping out. For most of his adult life, he was unemployed, engaging only in casual work. He had 5 children with different partners, most of whom were not in his care. His relationship with his brother was turbulent, and by November 2016, he was effectively homeless, sleeping in his car. His criminal history, dating back to 2008, was extensive and indicative of a persistent lawbreaker. He received his first custodial sentence, 12 months in a youth training centre, in 2010, followed by further sentences in youth training centres and adult imprisonment, including 14 months in 2013 and 18 months in 2014 for various offences. Critically, the judge noted that these past offences were committed when there was no suggestion that you were suffering from delusions, psychosis, or any mental condition that could be regarded as mitigating. He was characterised as simply a low-level criminal, willing, on occasion, to act violently. The judge then addressed the application of the Verdin's principles, which examine how impaired mental functioning impacts sentencing. The sheer gravity of his offending would ordinarily demand life sentences with no parole. However, the unusual features of the case, particularly his mental state, required more careful attention. Gargasoulas' counsel argued that his state of mind at the time of the offences reduced his moral culpability, warranting a non-parole period. Furthermore, it was established he was genuinely suffering from paranoid schizophrenia at the time of sentencing, a condition unlikely to improve. The judge summarised expert psychiatric evidence. Dr. Lester Walton appeared on behalf of the defence. He initially believed Gargasoulas might have had a mental impairment defence in January 2017, but later changed his view, agreeing his behaviour stemmed from extensive drug use, with schizophrenia developing after the offences. He conceded, however, that the psychotic disturbance at the time made at least some contribution to the offending for Verdin's purposes. Forensic consultant Dr. Andrew Carroll consistently rejected a legal mental impairment defence for January 2017, viewing his delusions as a product of your extensive history of ice addiction. He believed Gargasoulas was fully aware of the nature, quality, and wrongfulness of his actions. Professor Michael Daffin agreed no legal impairment defence was available. He diagnosed Gargasoulas with antisocial and narcissistic personality disorders, citing traits like grandiosity, need for admiration, entitlement, exploitation, lack of empathy, arrogance, failure to conform to norms, deceitfulness, impulsivity, irritability, aggressiveness, disregard for safety, and lack of remorse for prior crimes. Despite paranoid delusions, Professor Daffin also concluded that Gargasoulas knew the nature and quality of your conduct and that it would be regarded as wrong. Dr. Douglas Bell, who was Gargasoulas' treating psychiatrist, confirmed Gargasoulas had been suffering from paranoid schizophrenia since early 2017. He noted his extensive system of grandiose and bizarre religious delusional beliefs remained incorrigibly intact and that his mental state was essentially unchanged. While some modest but noticeable improvements in energy and self-care were noted with antipsychotic medication, his prospects were poor, requiring lifelong treatment. Dr. Bell also highlighted the adverse conditions of his current incarcerations, 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, which is far from ideal for treatment, and that incarceration could exacerbate his condition. The judge summarised that all three independent experts, Walton, Carroll and Daffin, agreed Gargasoulas was not mentally impaired under the relevant act at the time of the offences, but rather experienced a drug-induced psychosis. Crucially, the judge said, Gargasoulas was fully aware of the nature and quality of your actions. You knew full well what were the likely consequences. You appreciated that your conduct would generally be regarded by reasonable people as wrongful. The judge needed to consider whether to issue a non-parole period in sentencing. He needed to consider prosecution submissions. Gargasoulas' counsel accepted the life imprisonment was warranted for the 6 murder charges, acknowledging them as falling within the worst category of the crime. For the reckless endangerment offences, the judge proposed sentences broadly commensurate with the extent of the injuries suffered. The central issue to be resolved on the plea, he said, was whether Gargasoulas should be denied the possibility of parole entirely, as argued by the prosecution, or if a non-parole period should be fixed, as submitted by the defence. The law requires a non-parole period unless the nature of the offences or past history make it inappropriate. The judge did not regard Gargasoulas' past criminal history, though extensive, as making a non-parole period inappropriate in itself, citing High Court authority that a maximum penalty does not preclude a minimum term, and indeed, a more severe maximum often makes a minimum term more appropriate to allow for mitigation and rehabilitation. The prosecution's detailed submission arguing for the denial of a non-parole period highlighted multiple murders, including 2 children, the highest level of moral culpability due to the manner of the offending, no statutory discount for a guilty plea, though Gargasoulas did not contest facts at trial, 27 victims of serious reckless conduct whose impact needed reflection, an unenviable criminal history involving violence and dangerous driving, the prominent need for both general and specific deterrence, and the community's justifiable concern and need for protection. The prosecution asserted Gargasoulas' offending involved an unspeakable disregard for the sanctity of human life and described the murders as among the worst such offences to have come before this court. The judge found considerable force in this submission. The prosecution also emphasised that even though the convictions were based on reckless killing rather than intentional, This should not mitigate the object gravity, as Gargasoulas, as put to him in court, knew that by your actions you were likely to kill, or at least seriously injure, many innocent pedestrians. That did not faze you. The judge accepted this. Furthermore, the prosecution argued, and the judge agreed, that the offending was to some degree at least premeditated, citing Gargasoulas' earlier foreshadowing statements. Another aggravating factor was that the offences were committed while he was on bail. He was also to be sentenced as a serious violent offender, elevating community protection as the paramount consideration. Finally, the judge emphasised the profound impact of the offences on the victims, noting 55 victim impact statements from relatives of the deceased, injured survivors, and traumatised first responders and witnesses. The judge found the experience of hearing these statements agonising, describing the terrible devastation wrought by Gargasoulas' actions. The impact on those who survived, with debilitating physical and psychological injuries affecting their ability to work, pursue careers, and maintain relationships, was also highlighted. James Gargasoulas received a comprehensive and severe sentence for his crimes in the Bourke Street rampage. On the 22nd of February 2019, Justice Weinberg in the Supreme Court of Victoria sentenced James Gargasoulas to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 46 years. He was convicted of 6 counts of murder. For each of these, he received a sentence of life imprisonment. These sentences were ordered to be served concurrently. He was also convicted of 27 counts of reckless conduct endangering life for the numerous individuals he seriously injured. These sentences were also served concurrently with the murder sentences. The effective sentence was life imprisonment, reflecting the extreme gravity of his actions. The 46-year non-parole period is one of the longest ever handed down in Victoria, signifying the court's view that he poses an extreme danger to the community and will spend a vast majority of his life in prison. He will be in his late 70s before he is even eligible to apply for parole. The judge deemed that Gargasoulas' crimes were of the utmost severity and deserved an exceptionally lengthy period of incarceration to reflect the loss of life, the severe injuries, and the profound trauma inflicted upon the community. I'll now read directly from Justice Weinberg's judgment upon sentencing. Despite the mitigating factors upon which your counsel relied, your crimes can only be described as horrendous. Your actions were both callous and cowardly. Even making allowance for your disordered state of mind, you seem to have been concerned primarily with evading police, no matter at what cost. As I have said, you have shown no genuine remorse, and I do not accept that you have displayed any true empathy for those whose lives you have shattered or destroyed. Any sentence that I impose must reflect the community's thorough denunciation of what you did. The law requires that I have regard to those exceptional features of your case that provide support for the fixing of a non-parole period. Nonetheless, the need to ensure that you are adequately punished for what you did and that the community is adequately protected from you means that any such non-parole period would have to be one of exceptional, even extraordinary length. Accordingly, I now fix a non-parole period of 46 years, that being, in my view, the minimum period necessary to ensure that something approaching just punishment for your offences is achieved. There are some crimes that shatter more than just lives. They shatter trust. They force systems to face their failures. The Crown versus Gargasoulas was never just about one man. It was about the system that let him fall through the cracks, again and again, until it was too late. And behind every headline, every news report, were families, grieving children, empty bedrooms, lives forever changed. Justice was served, but it came too late. Thanks for listening to Crime Insider's Judgements. We love hearing your feedback, so please rate and review this episode. If you have a case you want us to cover, let us know via Instagram at LiSTNR Crime or TikTok at LiSTNR Crime Team. I'll be back again next Thursday with another case. I'm Dan Mullins, with sound design by Niall Fernandez. This series was recorded and produced on Gadigal land.